This is Classical Connections Radio. Classical Connections Radio on Apple Music.
There you are. So good to have you back with me. Hope the wind is in your sails today, and welcome to Classical Connections Radio. I'm Alexis Ffrench. Consider me your dutiful guide or musical concierge as we traverse this life-affirming classical landscape together. You're listening to Classical Connections Radio. I'm Alexis Ffrench, and it's time for 60-Second Sonata. And joining me this week is a wonderful broadcaster and host of a really special podcast called Believe in People, which you can find on Apple Podcasts. I think you're really going to connect with him.
Classical Connections Radio with Alexis Ffrench.
Delighted to say that joining me today for 60-Second Sonata is the wonderful Matthew Butler, who's one half of the creative team behind the amazing podcast Believe in People. Where do I start? Tell me about how it all started, how this incredible podcast started for you.
Interestingly enough, I've had the idea for the podcast for a number of years. I started working in a substance misuse service almost 10 years ago. And my original idea was I was just going to stay here for a couple of months. I remember my car insurance was due at the time. That was over £1,000. And I just wanted to do an office job for a little while and then get back on the road with my life as a professional wrestler, which sounds bizarre, but that was my life. And once I got here, I was just really inspired by the people that I was talking to. And I think, like a lot of people, I had a big misunderstanding of drug addiction, often thinking, well, it's a choice, you're doing this to yourself. But I think when I started to meet people and delve into their stories, it quickly became apparent that what these people that was using this service was dealing with was a lot of childhood trauma. And I think hearing their stories, I often put myself in that position and thought, if I experienced a fraction of what they had experienced, I think I would be looking for escapism through substance misuse too. Seeing people go from almost the brink of death, which is very much the case in our service, to turning their life around was so inspiring. And I think for me, I was sitting in this room and I was hearing these stories of recovery and the adversity that people had gone through and coming out the other end. And I just thought, if more people heard these stories, if we got these stories beyond these four walls, we could really challenge the perception and the stigma of what drug addiction is, of what alcohol addiction is, the realities of it, and what people go through to come out the other end and seeing how they rebuild their lives. And I'm lucky that after 10 years here, and again, like I say, I originally planned to stay here for just a handful of months, I still come to work every single day feeling inspired. And that was the idea of the podcast, was to really showcase these stories. And once I met, coincidentally, my producer, Robbie, and I told him of my idea, he was like, well, let's do it. And I'd sat on this idea for years, and much like a lot of things, I was like, yeah, of course, we'll do it. But within 2 weeks, he came to me with, he had the hosting, he had the equipment, and he just said to me, all you need to do is get me a participant. And I'd gone on to become the volunteer lead here at the service. So there was a lot of people with lived experience who wanted to tell their stories on air, basically. And that's what we did. We just didn't expect it to be as big of a success as it has been. And the mantra for the organisation is believe in people. And I think to work in this service, that's what we need to do. We need to believe in people. We need to believe that people can change. And that was the idea for the podcast, is sharing these stories.
Is there a personal experience that has inspired your personal journey in helping people to rediscover the essence of themselves?
I think it's seeing and that stigma that people face. And I think knowing myself for years, being someone who judged people as well. I remember going to my previous job that I had, and I'd see people drinking, super strength lager at such an early time in the morning. I thought, nice for some people to enjoy a drink at this time of day and to, party all night sort of thing. And I think it was that understanding of actually, no, that isn't the case. The main reason for this podcast, and I will share this story, was as part of my original role, we all used to have to take turns working on the reception desk. We didn't have a set receptionist, so we all got to do it. And in my naivety and maybe a lack of understanding of where appropriate conversations are meant to be had, a woman had come in and she had a black eye and she looked really in a bad way. And I hadn't been working the service very long at the time, and I asked her, why do you take drugs anyway? And that's when she shared a story of the trauma that she'd faced of sexual abuse at the hands of not just her dad, but her dad's friends, her uncles. And it broke my heart so much to think that the person that should be protecting this woman was actually causing her harm, and seeing her in a completely different light. And it goes back to that, okay, that is what happened to you. And I think now when I walk through the town centre, for instance, and I see a homeless person, it used to just be, oh, that's just another casualty of society. But now my brain thinks, what happened to you in your life to find yourself in that situation? And realising that everybody has a story to tell. Everybody, you walk through, the city centre, you'll walk past hundreds of people. Every single person has a story to tell. And I think using that as the ethos of the podcast to share those stories and hopefully to inspire change in others. I think during the lockdown, for instance, people couldn't attend mutual aid meetings. It wasn't how we connect now over FaceTime and Zoom and Teams. There wasn't this connection there in the way that we have it now. I think that's something that's come on a lot in the last 5 years, but people wasn't going to these mutual aid meetings where their recovery was so dependent on. And I think creating a recovery on the go model was another thing. Like, yes, maybe you can't go there in person. Maybe you're too anxious to go there in person, but you still need to hear these stories to inspire you. And that is where the ethos of let's make this podcast and let's get this story out there. And I think now we can officially say that we're one of the, if not the biggest recovery podcast in the UK.
It's so important for so many different reasons. And I know that your podcast has had such a major effect on the local communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in a drug and alcohol treatment service in Hull. We, worked with the people of Hull. And I think being a relatively deprived city, we do have a high number of people that use the service. I mean, I can't give you the population of the city, but I know there's up to 3,000 people that use our drug and alcohol treatment service for help with various substances, whether that be alcohol, heroin, ketamine, cocaine, cannabis. And we're not here to tell people, don't use drugs are bad for you. I think it's having that real understanding that if someone is in addiction, if someone is an addict, that they're going to use those substances regardless of what we say. Our main job is to keep those people safe whilst they are using substances and motivate them to make changes. And I think, like anything, if you see I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if I see a sign that says wet paint, do not touch, I want to touch it. Now, if I say to someone, stop using drugs, they're probably going to, rebel against that idea. So the idea is working with them where they're at and waiting for that penny to drop with them. And it could be the experience of a rock bottom moment. I think that's the interesting thing that we explore in our podcasts, are people's rock bottom moments when life couldn't get any worse for them. And that's when they decide to make the changes. And the rock bottoms are always interesting. I know an individual who had their leg amputated from injecting into their groin. That was the only vein they could get. Eventually, they lost their leg. You'd think that'd be enough, but that wasn't their rock bottom moment. They carried on injecting into the other leg and eventually lost that leg as well. And I think that is the power that addiction has. But alternatively, I've worked with a woman who had alcohol problems, and for her, the rock bottom was she forgot to pick her kids up from school because she was too intoxicated throughout the day. Now, very, very different rock bottom moments, but that was the moment for her when she wanted to get help for the other person. Again, 2 legs amputated and still not that rock bottom moment. And that for me shows the difference in where people are in terms of what does it take to make changes. And that in itself is something that I found incredibly interesting. And again, when people do make those changes, incredibly inspiring to hear those stories as well.
Wow, amazing. I'm going to turn to the piano, and thank you so much for sharing that with me, Matt, so eloquently. I'm going to turn to the piano. There are always keys and tonalities and shades and, I guess, shards of sound that come through words, that are communicated with words, but also through aura and presence. It's a lovely key. There's a very major, but there's also this, if you introduce these qualities into the key, it turns into something, but also and so this is where I'm going to start for this story. I call that believe. And thank you so much for your powerful words. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hurtling towards the end of the show. Going to close with something very special. And this piece, once again, is accompanied by a listening guide on the Apple Music Classical app. It's Mahler's Symphony No. 2 in C minor, The Resurrection. And this features the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra in chorus, Sir Simon Rattle, Dame Janet Baker, and Arlene Augier. And we hear Mahler's passionate, stylish, explosive writing in the symphony, which concludes with this awe-inspiring expression of hope, of optimism, and it will leave you utterly awestruck. Until next week, take care, be good, and don't forget to go where the music takes you.